Good afternoon, gentlemen. All right, good afternoon, gentlemen. Today's presentation is titled Bubba Watson's 2014 Masters and How Golf Technology Has Changed the Game and What Can and or Should Be Done. This is the 13th hole at Augusta, circa 2014. So as you can see, I don't know if you can see my mouse cursor, it's a par 5. So for those of you who don't play golf, that means that it typically should take you 5 strokes to go from the tee box on the left to the green on the right and get your ball in the hole. As you can see, this is what's called in golf a dog leg, which is where it's not a long straight course, but you have a bend like this that you have to play around. So essentially the hole was designed that you hit it out into the center and then up and around to the green, it taking you, four strokes to get to the green with a putt. So this is Bubba Watson. And Bubba Watson in 2014 broke the convention of how this hole is usually played, and has really sparked a controversy about golf technology and how it's impacting the game. So typically, as I talked about, it's played by, basically going around the bend. But Bubba Watson took a driver, the longest club in golf, and what's essentially he cut the corner. He went over into where the white is, and he ended up just shy of that little water feature in front of the green. Because of this, he was able to get an eagle on the hole, which is 2 strokes off. Bubba went on to win the 2014 Masters, and that whole play in particular was pretty significant because nobody had done it before, and the course was originally designed thinking that no one possibly could drive the ball over 300 yards, over the trees, over the out of bound, and get it just shy of the green. This is kind of a trend that's been going on in pro golf. In the last 40 years, the average drive has gone from 256 yards up to 295 yards, with the biggest spike occurring between 2000 and 2001, with 7 yards added to the average drive throughout the league. So ultimately, why did this happen? What were the factors that caused this increase in drives? Why does it matter? And then ultimately, what does this mean for the game of golf? But first, a little history.
Yes.
All right, so hobbits invented golf when Bandibirus cut off the head of a golfing bull during the Battle of Greensfield by the Shire. It flew about 100 yards and went down a rabbit hole, thus giving the game both its name and the origins. Humans started playing it in 1297, with the Dutch first officially recording it. It was reported that basically people, like a bunch of guys, would get together with little balls and wooden sticks, and they would have competitions to see who could get it across a course. It wasn't organized, and a lot of people didn't like it because as you'd be walking down the street of, say, Brussels, a big ball would come flying at you out of nowhere, and you just kind of have to dodge it. So because of this, most cities in the Low Countries, so Holland, the Netherlands, parts of Germany and France, banned the game in cities starting around the mid-1300s just because it was too disruptive and dangerous for citizens. Ultimately, the Dutch went on to create dedicated courses for it, which we have today still as golf courses. The Dutch loved the game a lot, and they took the game wherever they went. And the first golf game in the U.S. was played near Albany, New York in 1590 by some Dutch settlers that went up the Hudson Valley. The Scots really loved it much more than the Low Countries did, and are really associated with golf. Around the 1500s, it was brought to Scotland. They started playing it in a major way, and they gave us a lot of the modern terms for the game, like links. Links back in Old Scottish was how they'd refer to big barren grass fields, which we still use for golf today. Things like the tee box, the tee itself was originally a Scottish term. It was banned in Britain until the king tried it, and the king loved it, so it was made legal again. The oldest golf course that's been continuously operated is St. Andrews, which is pictured there. It was established in 1754, and it has operated uninterrupted since then. And because of this, it sets the de facto rules for golf outside of the U.S. So we have the PGA, and a lot of countries have swapped over to the PGA. But before that was established, whatever St. Andrews rules were, that was accepted as the common rules for the game, no matter where you were. So a couple kind of interesting rule things, what we're going to get into in a little bit. So golf didn't always have 18 holes. St. Andrews was originally built with 22, but due to some technological advancements in the clubs, even 100, 150 years ago, some of the holes were combined down to 18, and that became the de facto. In 1744, the first recorded set of rules were written down. Just some interesting, most of them are honestly still what we play with today. Some interesting ones: you have to play the tee off the ground. So you can't build a little like artificial hill that you can tee up and hit your golf ball out of. You have to hit it off of the ground. You have to play the ball as it lies, or specifically as they wrote in the original rules of golf, you are not to remove bones. So I'm not sure what kind of courses they were playing on back in the day. Old school golf, you have to play your original ball unless you lose it, which a lot of people misinterpret in today's golf as you have to, have to use your ball that you started with, or else you forfeit the hole. If your ball is accidentally stopped, as the rules mentioned, by a horse, you have to play it wherever the ball was stopped. And honestly, it's not that different from the modern rules that we have now. All right, so here's the question. How did Bubba achieve his amazing drive to change the game of golf? So first, let's look at the golf clubs that were used and that are used. So as we talked about earlier with the Low Countries, essentially they were just using wooden bats. They weren't any kind of tools that were specifically made for the course. The first golf clubs that were custom ordered was by King James IV of Scotland. They were prohibitively expensive. A lot of them were traditionally made out of birch with a harder apple wood for the head of the club. And they were tied together with little leather strings to keep them together. However, they would constantly fall apart and break, and they were very unreliable and very expensive to produce, which is why golf has a reputation and is still a game for wealthier people. It's an expensive game to play. The original golf bags consisted of some very British names for the different types of clubs. You had long noses, grass drivers, spoons, and niblicks, and the cleek was used to finish off the ball into the hole. So soft wood was used for the shaft with harder wood for the head. People back then didn't understand potential energy and how that worked, but essentially using a softer wood, you could get more of a whip action with a heavier club head, which could impart more energy onto the golf ball. Starting around the 1750s, blacksmiths had the technology where they could start producing iron heads, which greatly improved their reliability, consistency, and made a better quality club. In the 1800s, thanks to improvements in metal casting, golf clubs could be made using not the more expensive blacksmith method, but could be built in semi-large quantities that essentially made it more affordable for more people. And by the early 1900s, grooves, as we can see here, were placed on the face of irons. This was done ultimately, they again didn't understand it, but it increased friction with the ball and the club face. And it allowed you to A, get more distance, and B, allowed you to put a backspin on the ball, providing greater control for whoever's playing the game. Steel shafts became common and cheap, again, lowering the price of golf clubs, but they weren't legalized for competitive play until the Prince of Wales used them in competitive play in 1929. And St. Andrews said after that it was okay to use them. So again, as you can see, kind of seeing this as the game of the aristocracy, a lot of rule changes came about because royals did things and everyone else was kind of forced to accept it. Kind of an interesting thing I thought too, golf bags originally had 20 to 30 clubs, which essentially you had clubs for every different type of thing. and it wasn't reduced until 1939 down to 14 clubs, which is still the standard golf bag. In 1939 is also when normal names that we know, were used for clubs. You know, your different irons, your wedges, your putter, your drivers. Before that, it still had pretty silly British names that all kind of translated over to what we know today. So kind of recent developments. So graphite became common for drivers and woods, clubs with big heads starting in the 1970s. And they started to replace any metal or wood shafts that were still in the game. This is because, again, it offered more, you could put more energy into the ball as the club actually, or the shaft actually bends as you go through your stroke. Today, most drivers have graphite shafts, and they infuse them with boron to stop with twisting. It reduces twisting of the club, so you have a more consistent, basically contact every time you swing. Hybrids were introduced in the early 2000s. A hybrid is essentially an iron with a low loft, and they're easier to hit than typically very difficult to hit irons that have a very low loft. Something interesting too is drivers have become increasingly larger. We'll talk about that more in the next size, but the driver head is much larger, and they contain adjustable weights that can be adjusted depending on how you want to hit your shot. You can move weights around in the golf head or the club head that let you kind of direct the ball where you want it. So this is a cutaway of a driver, a modern driver. You can see some of the weights in that kind of light gray plastic part. Those are actually movable and adjustable. So the driver head has changed the most in the last 15 to 20 years. Back then, you wouldn't see golf clubs or driver heads that were above 350 to 400 cc's. And now they've actually had to cap the size of your driver at 450 cc's. You can't have a driver that's larger than that. A bigger driver head results in larger sweet spots. So essentially more surface area with when you hit the ball well, you'll get a good drive out of it. You'll get a lot of distance and a lot of range. It also gives for more forgiving drives. So even if you don't hit the ball perfectly, instead of ending up way off course, you'll end up just kind of a little less ideal than you would have been. And then finally, the biggest thing is it's increased drive distance. But is this the biggest contribution to Bubba's drive? I'd argue no. There are other factors that are at play. Kind of the most minor factor that has contributed to this increase in driving is the overall fitness of golfers. Basically, the last 20 years, professional golfers have gone from being seen as someone who's kind of flabby, just kind of out there drinking some beers, to someone who's in good shape. Older generations notably criticize younger golfers when they would spend a significant amount of time at the gym instead of spending time at the driving range, practicing their shot and getting better. Tiger Woods kind of changed the perception of this. He notably did, Navy SEAL workouts and was honestly a gym rat, but it led to him being the most dominant golfer of the early 2000s. After he did that, a lot of the younger generation, the next generation of golfers that came after him, followed his model to be essentially fitness first and golfing second. You have new institutes, things that you hadn't seen in the last 50 years, golf training facilities and golf workout regimens that you wouldn't have seen before, resulting in overall more muscular golfers that can hit the ball better and farther. But is this what caused Bubba's drive? I mean, you can look at him, go back. He's not a huge guy. He's not a Barry Bonds looking golfer. He's fit. You got to give him that, but he's not built. So I'd say it contributes, but again, I don't think this is the ultimate cause that led him to, and the league in general, to start driving exponentially farther. So next, and finally, we come to golf balls. So the first golf balls were carved out of wood, most commonly. these balls resulted in, they were imperfect for starters. They weren't perfect spheres. Water would absorb, or it absorbed water, so the balls would behave very differently when they were wet or when they were dry. The next big advancement in golf balls was they took leather and essentially would fill them with feather, hair, or just a mushy material that, again, was a little more consistent, a little better than using wood. But at the same time, it still had the same problems with it would get wet and behave differently, or you just wouldn't get the same consistency as you continued playing. In the 1800s, a man named Robert Adams started essentially taking that same leather ball, but he would coat it with tree sap. And essentially what the tree sap did was it kept water from absorbing into the ball, and it resulted in the ball keeping its shape and characteristics better throughout play. Over time, it would still deform or get wet, but the tree sap could be heated and could reconstitute the ball into a more consistent shape that would let players, play their best. So people started to notice that as they played these sap-covered balls, as they would get little scratches or nicks on the balls, they would their flight path would be better. They get better range, they get better distance and better control out of the ball. Ultimately, this has to do with aerodynamic effects. Again, let me know if I'm talking down to you guys, but by using a non-perfectly spherical surface, you create a boundary layer where you have turbulent flow around the golf ball. And this causes a almost protective coating of air to cover it, which helps it fly better through the air, unlike a knuckleball, which doesn't have any spin, no imperfections, and slides around a lot while it's traveling through the air. So manufacturers caught on to this, and they started to produce these golf balls with scratches already on them to help with flight path. So unlike the dimples we see today, a lot of the scratches were guesswork to the best of their ability. It wasn't something that was hard and fast designed for. And you had a lot of kind of interesting designs and markings on the balls. In the 1890s, an employee at BF Goodrich, the tire company and the rubber company, was waiting on one of his buddies to finish up at the office so they could go play a round of golf. And while he was bored, he took a small rubber ball and started coating rubber bands around it. And he used that to play golf with, and he did quite well. And this led to what will be the standard for the next 7,500 years. Essentially, golf balls would consist of a solid rubber core surrounded by rubber bands, or sometimes even a liquid covered in a plastic coating. From there, a new imprinter design would be made to get the aerodynamic effects they wanted. And this essentially led to the modern golf ball. Starting in the 20th century, instead of creating scratches or nicks on the balls, we actually started to get what we would know now as dimples, which are the little, almost like pock marks that are covering golf balls that we see today. And in the 1960s, the rubber ball that I was describing became the standard golf ball. It was almost unheard of to play with anything else. So I'd argue that the change in the dimples don't make all the difference between golf balls 50 years ago and golf balls today. Essentially, in the last 100 years, the dimple technology has improved, but it hasn't improved to the point where, and even if you look at drives over the last 100 years, they've gone up probably about 150 yards. So I would argue that the dimples help, but they're not the reason for the change. The reason for the change is it's all in the core of the golf ball. So the Pro V1 is considered the best ball in golf. They're very expensive and a lot of technology goes into them. Historically, people would use solid core balls if they wanted better distance. And they would play they'd play the rubber bands surrounding a rubber ball because they would give them better control. Essentially, they'd be able to dissipate the energy better. So what Titleist has done with their Pro V1 is create a ball that can provide both. You can't really see it on the ball on the right, but you can see it better on the ball on the left. The center is a different composite than the outer rings of the golf ball. and that gives you the best of both worlds. They're called compound balls, and they provide both distance and an extremely soft ball that you can control extremely well. 99% of players on the tour use compound balls. I'm honestly surprised that it's not 100% given their technology. And ultimately, I would argue that this gives pros their unprecedented control and distance that we're seeing in today's game.
How much do those balls cost?
For a pack of 12, it'll run you anywhere from 45 to 60 bucks. While a low end ball, you can pick up for a pack of 12 for anywhere from 20 to 30 bucks. So it's literally twice the cost.
Is there just one person that doesn't use them if it's like 99%?
I would be like, again, I would say that 1% is probably just the error of the survey. You know, you can't take a survey with 100% accuracy. I don't know why you wouldn't use a solid core or a compound core.
There's no regulation by PGA or whatever, like it has to be this kind of ball or this kind of ball, this thickness.
Nope. There are size regulations.
Okay.
So they all have to be the same size, but after that, there's nothing. Well, that's actually something that's proposed that we'll get to. So ultimately, though, like, got it. The game's changing. You know, guys are smacking it off the tee. Why does this really matter? So one of the problems is that courses are becoming obsolete. So especially for pro play, the courses are just too short. They can't essentially make them competitive. It's like child's play when you can drive it past all the bunkers, all the trees, all the bends. When you can just whack the ball past it all, you know, it just doesn't have the same level of competitiveness that traditional golf is used to. And if you look at all these golf records, you know, people scoring, 20 under in a tournament, that's just something you didn't see 20, 30 years ago because people couldn't. But I'd argue that more importantly, it's changing how the game is played. So Tiger Woods was kind of the pinnacle of the old style game, where players who couldn't drive as far but could hit the ball very accurately and could putt very accurately would keep their scores down. You know, they didn't rely on long drives to get them past obstacles because they couldn't. So basically it paid to be very accurate in where you place your shots, very accurate with your putting, and that's how you would take strokes off your game. The game in the last 10 to 15 years instead has emphasized long drives. If you're someone who can hit the ball the same distance it would take somebody to hit it twice with just a slight reduction in accuracy, your scores are the ones who are going to be better. And that's just something we haven't seen historically. You know, you have more forgiving essentially on the back end of your hole than you do off the front of it. So what can be done? So option one is do nothing. Essentially, people have been complaining about advancements in golf technology since it started. You know, even in 1900, there were articles talking about how it's unfair. Players are playing with, different new technology balls or playing with new different technology clubs. And ultimately, like it's just been a constant part of the game. The game will advance and change, and that's just something the players and the fans and the league will have to deal with. And that, you can argue that it's pointless to try to change the game or slow progress because it's inevitable. It's going to happen anyway. So option two is to change the courses. So some courses have already brought extra land in order to make the courses longer. So one of the things we talked about, the hole 13 in Augusta, the month after Bubba Watson had his drive, they bought essentially the parcel of land next to the course so they could make another tee box farther back, making it impossible for Bubba Watson to do what he did. So they had the money, the resources, and the land where they could expand and basically say, all right, it's never going to happen again. You can always add new obstacles. You say, hey, guys are usually driving it here now, so let's put a new bunker, a new water feature in here so they can't drive it to that same spot and make it easy for them. But ultimately, I'd say the flaw with this approach is that it's expensive. Not every course is going to be able to, buy extra land or plant a new tree that's going to be available in 30 years to be an actual obstacle. It's just not something that's realistic for all golf courses.
Wouldn't all golf courses wouldn't really deal with this problem though, because isn't this range issue just something for like high level pros?
Yeah, so essentially your local municipal courses, or your, just kind of, courses that'll never contend for any kind of championship play probably won't feel this pressure. But definitely any club that has members that participates that is either A, up for professional tournaments, or B, even has like pro-am tournaments. So there's a level below the PGA that a lot of, non-professional golfers participate in, where they essentially compete for amateur championships. And to qualify them, your course has to be rated to a certain level of difficulty. If your course isn't rated to that level of difficulty, you can't, you're ineligible for these tournaments. And for a lot of these guys who end up paying, thousands and thousands of dollars a year to be members at a golf course, there's definitely pressure on their management to keep the courses competitive to satisfy that member. So the third option is actually the most popular with players, and that is to roll back technology. Honestly, this isn't that dissimilar from what Major League Baseball does. For example, you can use metal bats up through the NCAA, but the major leagues use wood, because if they didn't, it would just be home run after home run after home run. There's also talk in Major League Baseball now about changing the actual ball that gets tossed around every couple of years. Look at baseball 10, 15 years ago, it was a batter's game, and now it's become a pitcher's game. So this is an ongoing debate in all sports. So some proposals have literally been to stop the advancement of technology in golf balls and drivers. Essentially say, hey, we are where we are. Don't go past it so we can keep the game competitive. Others, and we've seen this already with the limit on driver size, but I'd argue that just putting a hard stop to technology advancement isn't realistic, because especially as Nathan said, like outside of competitive play, there might be a guy who just wants to go ahead and get the newest piece of technology to improve his game. Tiger Woods, though, has been very vocal, and it's not that surprising, with that Tiger Woods is the one proposing this based off of how he plays the game. But he has championed this cause of professionals using limited or lower length, limited flight golf balls, essentially golf balls that are designed to not fly as far, and cores that are designed to essentially limit how far they can go for competitive play. So, the four of us would still be able to go out and buy these long distance balls. But if you're playing in the PGA, there would be certain balls, like Pat was saying, that you are only allowed to play with because it limits how far you can hit. And what's surprising is a survey of PGA players actually agreed with this option. They did a poll in 2017, and 61% of players agreed that getting a golf ball, limiting the distance that a golf ball could be hit is probably better and best for the future of the game. So it's going to be interesting the next 5 to 10 years to see how this is going to impact the game and what changes are going to be made to either courses or technology to keep golf competitive. So I hope you all got a good kind of insight and in looking to some golf technology, how it's changed and how it's impacting the game. If there are any questions, I'll be happy to field them now.
Since the technological process can't be stopped, would you argue that it's better to dump the whole stinking system and return to playing with wooden clubs and wooden balls in the streets of Denmark or wherever?
I think so. I think that if you really want to take the game back to its roots, I think it's pointless to try to basically everything or nothing. No half measures.
Mhm.
No, but I probably do support what Tiger Woods is proposing. I mean, it's the same thing as we're seeing in Major League Baseball. Just because the athletes are now so freakishly talented, you have to limit it somehow. And I think that that's a good middle ground where you're not stopping other technology. You're just creating a new obstacle that other technologies will have to overcome. Be that different shaped clubs or drivers to overcome a heavier ball. I think that's probably the way things are going to go eventually.
How does that work for baseball? Like, does NCAA, do they allow metal bats? You said, like, is there a big drop off from NCAA hitters into Major League, or is not a lot of issue with that?
That'd actually be something interesting to look at, like how players perform in their transition season. That's a good question, but I mean, I think it comes down to when you're dealing with a different caliber of athlete. There's always the joke, like, oh, the Cleveland Browns should play the best NCAA team. I think if you did that, even the worst NFL team would beat the best college team every time, just because you're playing with the best athletes in the world. And when it's PGA or MLB, those are the best guys in the world. So even using a wooden bat, you can still get home runs just because you're that powerful and your fundamentals are so good. But I think it's the same with golf. These are guys that could play 36 holes, go to the driving range, and still hit just as well. So I think that there probably would be a drop off at first. Probably a couple guys are dependent on the better balls, but I think in the end, it would create a more competitive game.
I think one difference too with NCAA baseball is that most of the best players do not play college baseball because they're either foreign or they go straight from high school to pro ball. One thing I think is interesting is I see a lot of like parallels between this, and I know that professional swimming had a lot of controversy in the 2008 Olympics with like that swimsuit where they broke all the world records. Are there any
lasers
in swimming that all of the world records that currently exist, or all of like the course records that currently exist, are going to be basically like unbreakable if they decide to scale back on golf technology?
Yeah, I think that'd be the case. I mean, I think it's an amazing parallel, actually. It's these guys playing with, the best technology you can offer, and when you stop doing that, it's not going to be the same level. You might get one or two truly freak athletes that can still get to those times or those stroke counts, but I think if technology is capped, what we are seeing now will be the records that stand for a while.
Yeah, I wonder how if they require a certain ball basically or disallow a certain type of ball, how that would be enforced. And I'm thinking specifically of a time I remember when like an MLB player was using a corked bat rather than a regular bat, and how you could get away.
Sammy Sosa.
Yeah,
Baltimore Orioles, great.
Huh. Yeah, that's a good point.
I think you could probably just drop it and see how high it bounces or something like that. Or just give the players the balls. I'm sure I know that cheating in golf is like a thing to some extent. Maybe not like the same way it is for baseball, but
what they could do if the drop test was a thing, that was they could have something like what Volkswagen had for their emissions tests, where they have a computer in the golf ball that has situational data and it decides to turn on depending on what's going on outside of it.
There are enough rules guys on the course. Like, you don't see them when you watch golf on TV, but ultimately I think it'd be harder to change the core of a golf ball and get into league play than cork a bat. Just actually, what? Never mind. I take that back, because I was going to make the argument that a manufacturer has to produce it, and it'd be hard, if you're Titleist or something, to mark the ball one and just have a different core. Essentially, that would make you implicit. But if that being said, if Sammy Sosa was corking his bat, I'm sure there had to be help from the manufacturer. So, yeah, I don't know. I guess that would be a new level of cheating that's out there.
So I know you said that fitness, don't attribute much of the success to it, but I'm just wondering. I know that I think it was Kim Jong Il. He once in a 18-hole round of golf had something like 14 holes in one. So I'm just wondering if North Korea has particularly good golf technology, or if he is just a golf specimen many orders of magnitude better than anybody else.
Well, he's a specimen in general. He didn't have an anus, which I think was well documented. But I think maybe North Korea has some golf technology that I can update this PowerPoint in a couple of years once it leaks out of the country. I think it's really the only way to know. Or you could argue that that's proof right there that fitness has nothing to do with how well the players are playing. That's all the balls and the clubs.
What do you think of people that play golf in jeans?
They should be firmly yet politely asked to leave.
That was me the one and only time I played golf.
We're recording, so I'll keep my opinions polite to a degree, but nothing lets me know I'm going to have a miserable time either following a group or playing with a group if they show up in jeans.
I was asked to leave, so I think.
Were you really?
When was this? Where was this? Was this
This is South Carolina. This was a Crow something. I can't remember the name of the course. I think it had the word Crow in it.
What's proper golf pants attire?
So for PGA play or any kind of competitive play, you have to wear pants. And then after that, most clubs will do it on a club by club basis. Like I know the club at home, you could wear shorts, but not cargo shorts. And that's typically the standard. Yeah, no, you can wear shorts, just no cargo shorts. That being said, you shouldn't wear cargo shorts to begin with. So
what about like a seersucker suit with like a straw hat?
that would probably be allowed.
What about like a triple-breasted suit, like really wide shoulders?
Something with shoulder pads and coattails and a cummerbund.
You're going on a fox hunt or something?
So that guy's wearing looks like a three-piece right there.
I was thinking more like what Steve Harvey wears, basically.
I think Steve Harvey's actually a prolific golfer. Or let me rephrase. I'd be shocked if he wasn't. So I bet you he goes from the set sometimes in his get up. He doesn't have time to change. Gets out there. But I think it's really up to the discretion of the starter. Like Pat, who asked you to leave when you were asked to leave?
They didn't really ask me to leave, but like he started like coaching me and like trying to unsolicited, like telling me how to play golf. Wearing
jeans to golf is a good way of letting everybody know you're a beginner.
Yeah, it was Crowfield Golf Club, and he said like, oh, some of the locals here get like really pissed off if you're wearing jeans and stuff like that. And I was like, they might ask you to leave, and I was like, okay. Well, I guess if they do, I'll leave. I think he was very politely asking me to leave.
That's Southern hospitality.
Yeah, this is in South Carolina. So.
Good. I hope you all learned a little something about golf today.
I did.
Have you ever watched Dorf on Golf, the Tim Conway videos?